So for this video and the next few videos I make, we're going to be making programs that sort of mimic the existing behavior in Python. So the idea here is to recognize that there are lots of different ways to solve problems, and by trying to solve these problems without using the built-in tools Python has given us, it gives us a better understanding of what's happening. It's a better understanding of how Python works under the hood. Okay, so this first one we're going to do is string length. So we're going to try to just think of an alternative way to calculate a string's length. Okay, so let's say I have the string s. We'll go ahead and call it string, and this is equal to something. All right. Now I want to start an index at 0, and basically we're going to employ some sort of loop, right? We have to start, and I want to iterate through the loop. Each time through the loop, I'm going to try to access one of these individual characters. So I'm going to try to access the first character with this index. And if I can, that's a good thing. And I will increment the index by 1. And then I'll try to access the item at that index, right? And then if I can, that's good. And I'll increment the index and try to access the item at that new index, right? This is the idea of the loop. So we'll say, while true, I'm going to go through and try to access the item in our string at index. Okay, so index starts at 0, and then assuming this works, then I'm going to say index equals what it did before plus 1. Right? An alternative way to say this is index plus equals 1. All right, so let's just take a look at this by itself and see what's going to happen. What do we think is going to happen? We have the string, index is 0. So while true, this loop is going to run infinitely unless an error occurs. And so we look in the string and try to access the item at index 0, which should be an s, so that works. And then we increase the index, so that's an index of 1 now. And so then we start the loop again. We access index 1. That's that character. That works. We add 1, so the index is now 2. And we go through like that. Eventually, the index is going to be beyond the length of the string, right? So the highest indexed value allowed in this string is 1 minus the length of the string, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the length of the string is 9, right? So I started at 1 and counted, and that's the length. However, indexing starts at 0. So the last item is always the length of the string minus 1. Okay, so at some point, this index is going to be the length of the string minus 1, and we'll be able to access that last character, which is the G. And when we add 1, that will now be, the index now is going to be the same as the length of the string. And that's an invalid index because there's nothing beyond this G character. And at this point, when we try to access this, there's going to be an error. All right, so let's take a look at this. We'll just run this with Python 3 and stringlength.py. All right, and sure enough, string index out of range. Okay, so we didn't print anything. We could go ahead and print this if we wanted to see the individual characters, but we don't have to. We can run that. And we see each individual character prints out. Once it gets to G, it goes ahead and increments the index, and it tries to access an item in this string, but the index is out of range. So this is an index error. You'll see this error commonly in Python. All right, string index out of range, but it could be an index error with a list or any number of different things, right? So this is index out of range. So how can we detect if this error occurs? So we want to know if we can access this item, but if an error occurs, we know we've reached the end of the string. Okay, so this gets into a topic called exception handling in Python. So I can try something, and if an error occurs, then I can do something else. I can try it, and if it works, it's fine, but if an error occurs, I'll do something else. So this is called a try except statement. So we have a try block, and this is the thing I'm going to try. The reason I put it in a try block is because sometimes this might produce an error. I don't know if it always will, though, right? for example, the first several times, this does not create an error, right? So it's fine. But at the last time through the loop, it does create an error. So I'm trying this, and if it works, that's fine. And if it works, I'm going to go ahead and increment my index. Now, if there's an exception, so try except. So the exceptions are when an error is thrown, or an error is thrown, or an exception is thrown. Which, if we have an exception, then I'm going to do something else. So at this case, if I was able to access the item, and then I add 1 to the index, so this would be the 9th letter, so that's the 8th index. I add 1 to it, so the index should be 9, which is the length of my string, right? So I don't really want to do anything here, so I'm just going to pass in the except block. The only thing we have this exception block here for is if we encounter the error, I don't actually want my program to stop. So without this try except block, my program halts and it traces back in the program where the source of the error was thrown, and it wasn't handled, so the program stops. Here, we're handling the exception. We're going to try this, and if there's an exception, pass is just saying don't worry about it. You know, I could have another thing here. I could say print don't worry. Okay, so in this particular case, we don't need to worry about this exception because we intentionally know that this might cause an error, and when it does, that's actually what we're looking for. Once it causes the error, we know we've reached the end of the string, right? So we can say print, you know, the length of the string is index. All right, so let's take a look at this. Let's run this. Okay, so now we see we have an infinite loop. It says don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. Now why is that? Okay, the problem is we have while true. So if there's an exception, we print don't worry, but then index is still out of range. Index is still past the length of this string. So the 8th index here is actually the 9th character, right? And index now has the number 9, and there's no character there. So if index is holding 9, every time we try to access the item at index 9, we're going to get an error, right? So what we need to do is in this except clause is do something that will prevent this loop from continuing. So there's a special keyword for that, break. All right. So now we should just see the don't worry one time, and then we're going to break out of the loop. So this while true runs the loop infinitely unless in the body of the loop somewhere there's a break statement. So this break statement will break us out. All right, so we go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 9 characters, and it says the length of the string is 9. All right, so this is kind of nice. We can test it with something else. House has 5 characters. We can run that. House, don't worry, the length of the string is 5. Okay, so let's make this a little bit more useful. Let's make it a function. In Python, we have the function len, and you pass it a string. So let's do something like that. So we're going to define a function, and this is going to be called string length. Okay, so I'm defining a function, and I'm planning on passing in a string. All right, so now basically string is defined as the parameter to the function, so I don't need this. And then in the body of my function is mostly this stuff. So I'm just going to move all this stuff down. Okay, so this is all inside the body of my function now. All right, so what do I want to get rid of? I don't want to print things out. I don't need to print out the individual characters, right? I just need to try to access it. So trying to access the character at a particular index is the thing that will potentially throw the error. It has nothing to do with the print. The print was just so we could see these characters. So I can remove that print safely. And so if we are able to access the character, that's fine. Add 1 to the index. Okay, if we have an exception, right, that means that our index is equal to the length of the string. So we don't need to print out don't worry, because the actual Python length function, len, does not print that out. So we're going to remove that. And then the result of the length function in Python is not a print statement, right? We are just going to return that index value. Return index. Okay, so this is just an alternative way to code up the string length function. Okay, so we can test this out. We can say enter a string, and then we'll get that as user data, and then we're going to print we'll make a format string here. Let's see, the string length function, and we're gonna get the result. So this is going to be, we're going to call string length and pass in user data. Right, so this is a format string. It's just a string that allows you to inject the value of some Python expression. So this Python expression runs. This expression is actually a function call. So this all expressions evaluate down to one single value. So this function call runs, passes in user data as an argument. So whatever's stored in user data here then gets stored in the string parameter, right? And then this runs, eventually returning an index. So this should be an index number. All right, and we'll compare that to the Python len function. So instead of running string length, we'll run length. Okay, so this is the built-in string length function that we're trying to mimic. All right, so let's run this and type in apples, string length 6. Right. Let's try run it again. String length 7. Right. So whatever we type in. Our function now is mimicking the behavior of the len function. Now this isn't exactly how Python does it. It's quite a bit more complicated because strings are actually technically kept track of as objects, and they have additional features. So, but this is just a good strategy to try to implement behavior. Try to implement the behavior that already exists in Python with your own function in a different way, and it helps you sort of understand how you could do things, and helps you understand what Python is doing a lot of the times. Okay, so that's enough for this video. We'll do several of these in the next upcoming videos.